What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another breakdown video for the Detroit Lions. And today, we are here with a mini breakdown. This is not going to be your normal draft breakdown or free agent breakdown because this move happened yesterday. We're already into training camp. However, these are the kind of moves that I don't want to overlook because we've seen before moves like this. Maybe, just maybe, he may have found his home with the Detroit Lions for years to come. We've seen this before. We saw it with John Kaminsky. That's a great example. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to a video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with another breakdown video for the Lions. Again, I'm aiming for this to be like a mini breakdown, so a lot quicker. Not going through like all the traits, that whole like layout, but diving into this player a little bit, giving a little bit of background and what I've taken away from watching him so far over the past couple of seasons in the preseason. We really didn't see him much in the 2023 preseason, unfortunately, with the Dallas Cowboys. He had an MRI. He had an injury on his foot. And in 2022, where we did see him with the Dallas Cowboys, played in every preseason game, didn't participate in a regular season. We don't have much regular season film to look at here of the former third-round pick, Malik Jefferson. And I said that right. Former third-round pick out of Texas back in 2018. That has unfortunately bounced around a ton so far in the NFL. So starting with Cincinnati in 2019, the next season, after not having really played very much for Cincinnati, was mainly a special teams option, played in the preseason but didn't really pop. In 2019, he was let go by Cincinnati heading into the season. Now, a key aspect of that as well, new coaching staff, and we know when there is turnover in the staff, you can also very quickly see a lot of turnover within the roster. But since that time, he hasn't really been able to stick with any team specifically. He went to Cleveland, then to the LA Chargers in 2019, where he's waived in 2020, then to the Titans practice squad for 5 days in 2020, then his second stint with the LA Chargers, where he was on the practice squad, got promoted to the active roster, and then unfortunately hit IR. Continuing in 2021, he landed with the Indianapolis Colts, was again promoted to the active roster, earned a futures deal for the next season, before ending up with the Dallas Cowboys in 2022, where he spent really his most time in the NFL, played all preseason games. I thought he played pretty well, was let go right before the season for the Dallas Cowboys, like those final roster cuts, but stuck around the practice squad, got a futures deal for 2023, and unfortunately, again, he only played in one preseason game, so he wasn't really able to build on anything there, and then in 2024, did not get a futures deal, so he became a free agent. Now here he is as a Detroit Lion. And quickly, before we really start to dive into this, initial impressions, I like what the Lions have in the linebacker room, but they did have a couple roster spots open. Unfortunately, Michael Badgley out for the season. They had a couple roster spots open. They also may go at a kicker here soon. I expect that to happen. But, so maybe this was the Lions felt like they needed some linebacker depth. It could have also been as simple as like this was a guy that was standing out to them and they just wanted to go at him just to see what he brought to the table. Because I do like what we have at linebacker right now. It's never an issue to add some depth, add some competition. Sin does add some real juice to this group, athletically speaking. But also, I think there is some potential position flexibility here, which you know the Lions would love. But also, third down flexibility. And I think that is a spot that you could potentially try to carve out a role and find your way onto the field. If you think about Jalen Reese-Maybin, even though he had a history with the Lions last season, it was special teams, which this player has a background of doing. So if he can show out in that category, maybe he can find himself onto the roster. But then it was, hey, Jalen Reese-Maybin, you carved your role out on pass downs in sub packages. You were reliable. We saw it instantly. And once that happened, it was like, this guy's going to play for the rest of the season. You may not be a 3-down starter, but you're going to play in those spots. And I think the Lions could always use guys to push that kind of competition in this linebacker room. And I think this is the type of player that could absolutely bring that to the table, but also could bring position flexibility as well on early downs. So let's dive into the notes that I have so far on Malik Jefferson going through these preseason games. I apologize, the 2022 stuff is not all 22, so they'll be cut kind of short, but shout out to NFL. I don't know. For whatever reason, they did that. They have like last year's, but they don't have the year before for preseason. I don't know why. I think they just started doing preseason all 22. Anyways, with that being said, let's dive into some of the notes here. So the first thing I start off with is the coverage aspect. This is key, especially in kind of that will linebacker role, which I think we've seen a lot of. There were questions coming out of the draft, instinctually, the speed at which he diagnoses certain plays, the reliability that you have there. So you start with pass coverage first in a league where teams pass the ball a ton. And this is an era where there's a lot of things to like. Athletically speaking, a guy that ran a 4.5 240 at 6'2", 236 when coming out for the draft with 32-inch arms and a 1.56 10-yard split, which is absolutely incredible to see that number. That's like a cornerback type of number. Now, his three-cone drill is definitely a lot worse, 7.12, and I think that does show up on film. Some of the lack of maybe flexibility does show up. You don't see a ton of bend in his game. He plays a little bit upright. But to see those athletic traits definitely carries over a lot of that into coverage ability. And this is the first thing that I had to start with. The first thing that stood out to me here is playmaking at the catch point. In college, he had 7 forced incompletions. has, and you even see it in the NFL, the ability to make plays at the catch point. And this is another challenge for linebackers in all, right? Sometimes they don't have the length, maybe they don't have that closing burst. He carries both of those aspects to really squeeze routes at the catch point, and he's just a freakish athlete when the ball gets up in the air. And you'll see great acrobatic plays on the football, especially underneath on tight ends or running backs out of the backfield, where he has real upside to actually make a play on the football. Not just cover his guy, but if the ball is thrown there, to make a play on the football, disrupt the catch point. That is the first thing that stood out athletically when we watched this player. Some real swivel ability. You'll see the ability to handle a lot of Tampa 2 zone. He easily gets depth very quickly. He can really get into that half turn to run. He creates depth with ease. So a lot of the times the usage that you saw with Dallas was Tampa 2 linebacker playing the deep third, playing the deep middle of the field, or it was a lot of man coverage assignments, running backs, tight ends, those kind of things underneath. Now, I thought he had problems there in terms of sticking with routes that were, say, angle routes, things like that, even from backs that were a little bit more complex, just because he would play so upright at the top of the route, and there was like a little bit of a hitch, and seemingly his transition, it wasn't immediate. And you'd see this not as much against like tight ends that were in line because they wouldn't really be able to expose him. And because he had that burst, he could very quickly get into a turn and run and close the distance and close airspace. So he had the athleticism there, could do it top down. But when you just talk about mirroring a running back or maybe a more athletic tight end one-on-one, that's where it felt like there was a little bit of hitch. He wasn't as fluid in his transitions. The agility started to show up. It felt like a little bit there as well.
And I can also appreciate the control and awareness that he would play with. Here where the offensive line notices it's not working upfield, quickly finds the tight end on his short drag route, and he's able to pick it up, turn and run with it. Or when he's working onto the football at the catch point, when he's able to kind of pace himself, not get there early, play with some control to, one, not give up the big play, but two, specifically, not good call for flags for arriving early and have the control at the catch point to make a play on the ball.
But the ability to get depth in zone coverage and open up a variety of zone coverage usage was definitely an aspect within his game. I didn't love the short area quickness necessarily either, and again, that kind of comes back to the fluidity. You see it more so in underneath zone, where you'll see active eyes, you see active communication, but in underneath zone, not just really closing airspace on routes underneath. He's flexible enough to kind of flip his hips and turn and run with ease, to be honest, and that opens up a lot of flexibility. Flip his hip left to right, flip and half turn seamlessly.
Quick look at some of that hip flexion.
The problem is in those Tampa 2 spots, I thought he played with way too much depth at times where he would just completely overrun the middle of the field. He had a little bit less body control. It's almost like the vast difference that I see with a guy like Jack Campbell, who may not be in a straight line as fast. And, you know, they're both a little bit higher in terms of the way that they play. Jack Campbell's just a lot taller, and Malik Jefferson just doesn't play with a ton of bend. But you see a lot more body control with Jack Campbell in terms of slowing himself down, pacing himself for the middle of the field, versus Malik Jefferson, who can easily get out there, turn and run. But you just didn't see as much like body control in terms of pacing when he was getting a little bit deeper in his zone coverage. So the versatility to do a lot is there. You just saw issues like that. I like, too, with the communication aspect as being a part of that Dallas defense, a lot of switch man assignments. So the quickness to pass off routes underneath, handle an oncoming man assignment, he was pretty easy in those categories. Add the issue, and again, this was kind of the underneath zone. Windows are really tight, and you really have to kind of close airspace in those spots. Is that in underneath zone, I just thought his balance between finding the quarterback, finding the man, was just not consistent. He'd seem to find one, but not the other. Couldn't really always keep vision. It just wasn't as fluid. For me, I didn't love him in that area, but definitely athletically, a guy that can cover in man coverage and cover some of the more basic routes from running backs and, you know, tight ends and be kind of an impact player at the catch point definitely does bode some upside for man coverage responsibilities, which is great for third down because you're probably either going to be doing that or you're going to be blitzing somebody. Some guys will drop in a zone. That's probably not his role. Probably one in covering someone man-to-man or rushing the passer. We'll get to that in a second. Now, we talk about the play speed, just how fast this player plays, because that matters way more than any of the 40 time or things like that. First off, it's the short area burst that shows up in a lot of different ways. The quickness at which he scrapes the line laterally down the line of scrimmage, the quickness at which he does that short area twitch and burst in the lower body to close. He closes in between the tackles extremely well. So as soon as you see the running back pop, if he's got an open lane, he's going to finish immediately. He doesn't let those guys get up to him because of some of that lower body burst that he does carry. The issue I have here that slows him down is the consistency in terms of footwork. I thought there was times where maybe he would either misplay it or false steps, or he'd just be delayed to kind of get into the play. But that specifically showed up, I thought, when he was handling a little bit more responsibility of, hey, we need gap discipline here. We need your gap responsibility to be on point, to play the front side of a run in this spot, versus when he would be able to play on the backside and say it's a wide zone or it's a toss play and they're just getting away from you and he's at the will linebacker spot, he could just chase and track it down. When he was able to do that, then you start to see the kind of impact player he could be. And he could do this really anywhere on the interior as long as they're just asking him to get downhill as a run defender and just play really fast. But maintaining some of that integrity, being very consistent in his footwork, his first step being accurate, you would see some times where he would have to recover athletically where it's like, okay, he kind of fell behind, but there he is. He launched himself back into the play athletically. athletically, or he wouldn't always win to the spot of an offensive lineman, kind of beat them to the spot, take control, like, hey, this is my turf. All right, I'm going to hold ground here. We see Jack Campbell do that. We looked at one of our Dodcast episodes. We talked about Jack Campbell. That's one thing that he does really well. Position himself. He's leveraged. He gets there early, sits himself down. He's gonna hold his gap consistently. This is the kind of player that you get maybe a little more of the opposite, where he's not going to do that consistently. His take-on technique is inconsistent, but he's going to fly downhill. He's going to crash into the backfield, and he's going to guy that's going to give you some negative plays sideline to sideline. See that, like when he does diagnose the run scheme, and again, if it is a wide zone scheme or something like that, you'll see him kind of crank up some of that aggression and how fast he can actually close. His aggression crank up the trust that he has in himself in those spots where he can absolutely attack, and that shows up especially a lot off the backside.
And we did get to see some effectiveness on the line of scrimmage specifically, and here you are against Jacksonville here on the backside. This kind of points to some of the contact balance and things we'll talk about later, but then you get a play like this. Now, again, trying to maybe spill this, take the tight end from the inside outside, but kind of loses some of that control. All of a sudden, the quarterback has an easy path. He's not forced to get wide, and it's a straight line to the end zone, and no one else can get back into help.
His first step was accurate, and again, a lot of that came from the wide scheme, and he was able to recognize it. I thought pulls, counters, those kind of things could be a little bit delayed, but it's really just about kind of dialing in the footwork there. You'd see the same thing on play action. Maybe he'd be a little bit too aggressive, like the footwork, kind of just misplaying some footwork here. But for the most part, he was very quick to recognize when a full scheme was going one direction. He could get very fast into that first step, and he could be the first guy to the spot. Now, when you talk about some of the instinctual aspect here, this kind of carries over. I thought his vision just in general was a little bit overly aggressive against the run. Play action sets. Gap discipline was inconsistent when he was working downhill, but as I touched on, he definitely carried some of the recovery athleticism to help himself out.
But I do want to credit his decisiveness because that can keep that play speed cranked up, and he for sure had that.
Now, at the point of attack, a little bit hit, a little bit miss here. There were things I liked, things I didn't like. What I liked about him is that he carries some real slipperiness to his game, and this shows up as a blitzer. It was one of the first things that popped for me is like, oh, this guy can get some pressure. This guy can be an impact player at getting after the quarterback. He actually has some blitzing upside, and I think this carries over to the slipperiness you'll see at the second level, the ability to evade blocks, and also evade blocks in really tight traffic and really small windows to kind of set himself free in pursuit. But specifically where I loved here is I thought there was some real body control and some real strength through blocks and still show some of that slipperiness and not constantly end up on the ground.
Back to the decisiveness, one of the special traits I think he brings is the navigation on the fly against the run. Immediate oncoming blocks. You see it in pursuit to still find the ball carrier and make a play.
We're getting washed out of plays, especially on like zone blocking plays. Really got to see some of that strength in the upper body. Like at the point of attack, you'll see it on tight ends, but you would see it against offensive tackles at times too. Like if he was playing that sandbacker role, not only could it be an impact player at a guy that could press up on tight ends, but specifically even setting the edge. You saw some of that real upper body strength. He has sufficient length, and he could really jolt guys at the point of attack, which leads to more upside in his ability when taking on blocks. Like there's athletic upside there. It's just inconsistent. I didn't really think he was playing with leverage in the blocks. Wasn't always playing with the deep bed that he needed to, and his take-on technique was just very inconsistent for me. That was one of the biggest issues that we get to here, and that to me shook a lot of the stoutness consistently. Getting to the spot on time, setting himself up early rather than like really late on the play where he'd kind of like float into the gap and then he'd see it and then it's like, I'm just going to run into the offensive lineman. Like positioning himself early to lock out. It's not consistently sturdy at the point of attack, and that would also slow, I thought, his ability to consistently stack and shed, right? Maybe you get the stack, but you wouldn't get the shed aspect, and those things didn't play in unison. It didn't look as fluid as it does, say, with a guy like Jack Campbell, for example. But again, strong ankle flexion, strong lower body, can deal with contact, and you saw when he was able to set the edge, he is pretty strong in the lower body, so usually, even if he kind of gets pushed out a little bit or it's not natural, you're not going to see him get washed out of the play because he's able to kind of just work his way through traffic. It may not be pretty, but he could just find a way to kind of slither his way through. One aspect that I want to touch on, which is pass rush, because there's things I like here. The biggest thing is that he's sudden. He's a sudden pass rusher with burst that can show up in his get off. It can show up on his suddenness to change his pass rush route. The issue I have is he doesn't cover a lot of distance. He doesn't carry a lot of length either. As a pass rusher, that's kind of a problem. He is effective as an interior rusher, can get on guards very quickly, can catch those guys off balance, and he's got the strength in the upper body to actually create some like knockback and potentially create some bull rush opportunities to get those guys off balance. Short strides, the choppiness as a pass rusher, as well as some of the lack of bend and flexion at the top of the rush, to me kind of limited the upside of like, this guy's a freakish pass rusher. But there's definitely definitely something there, and he plays with really good pursuit and motor in these spots. Overall, like the strength that he showed as a pass rusher to overrun the pocket, be able to slam on the brakes and get back into the play, get offensive linemen and tight ends off balance, and be able to maintain contact balance to find himself back to the pocket. That was the thing that was most exciting because he could win from the interior, but he could also win from the outside. He wasn't going to hit you with like combos, it seemed like, as a pass rusher, and he wasn't going to just dip you on the edge and open up so much variety, but he could definitely get after it as a spot blitzer, maybe more so than just a consistent straight-up pass rusher. But maybe that's something the Lions try here. Dallas has always had those super athletic linebackers, so it makes sense that they would have went after a guy just like this that has those traits. And I do think that that is an area to really keep an eye on because for the Lions, as I said, they could use more guys that can push players for third down ability. And again, a lot of that's going to be man coverage or it's going to be, hey, rush the passer. And to me, he brings some of that for sure. I don't think he brings rushing the passer to James Houston level. Houston just has a deeper arsenal that he could tap in. But versus Derek Barnes last season, wins differently. But I would love to see in a full sample size who's actually a better pass rusher between him and Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes having more variety. We know he has a defensive end background. He definitely has better length. But this player is just so stop-start, so sudden as a pass rusher, that especially as an interior rusher, I may like him more than Derek Barnes. I may like Derek Barnes a little bit more for consistency on the edge, but I'd love to see how that would shake itself out. The tackler, open field tackling was a little bit inconsistent, mainly because he just played a little bit too tall into contact. That was the issue, and then he had to kind of drop his weight. He wouldn't always get like full force into contact either. He'd kind of fly by tackles a little bit more than really running through tackles and being consistent. He'd kind of just fly past them. But in the box, that didn't show up as much of an issue because it was just shorter area for a runner to actually go with the football. And because of that, he was pretty consistent at shutting runs down very quickly between the box. For him, it's going to be about being healthy, of course. Also trying to shake out probably a third down sub-package opportunity. Athletically, he can do it. He can make some big plays at the catch point, and that could separate him in camp. But then also special teams, of course, if he's really going to make this roster and stick around, that's probably where it's going to start, just like a guy like Jalen Reese-Maben. So with that being said, and they were both third-round picks, I think. With that being said, man, Malik Jefferson is a Detroit Lion, man. I'm rooting for you. See how you do at camp. This is the type of player that's really built to play alongside a player just like Jack Campbell, right? Play alongside a Derek Barnes. But I think there's potential flexibility here, and I would love to see where the Lions put him in training camp. So we'll see where the Lions like him at. But until then, thank you, Brad, for watching, and I'm out.